Link TV presents Mosaic World News from the Middle East. Here are today's top stories.
Israel starts pilot prison visits from Gaza relatives for the first time in 7 years. Lavrov accuses the West of blackmailing Russia over Syria. And anti-NATO sentiment continues to grow in Pakistan. Mosaic, world news from the Middle East, begins now.
Israeli occupation authorities allowed a limited number of relatives of Palestinian prisoners from the Gaza Strip to visit their children for the first time in 7 years.
The International Committee of the Red Cross transported dozens of the prisoners' relatives to Ramon prison in the Negev desert, where their children are languishing. The visit is the first in over 7 years.
The visit comes in accordance with an agreement between the Israeli Prison Service and the prisoners to end their last hunger strike.
This woman is counting down the minutes and seconds to a meeting she's long awaited. She will see her husband, even if from behind bars. It is the visit that the prisoners' relatives have been deprived of for several years under Israel's orders. For her daughter, the issue is a little different. She was an infant when her father was arrested 22 years ago, and today she is older. She has since gotten married, but has not seen him.
We were happy, and I was happy that they are finally allowing us to visit. But at the same time, I was sad. I mean, why aren't we allowed to visit? I'm the prisoner's daughter, and I have a right to see him. I last saw him 8 years ago. I've never been allowed to visit.
Hajja Ibrahim Baroud has a different story. She's been prevented from visiting her son for 15 years under the pretext of security. Today, the visit brought Ibrahim great joy.
How can I describe it to you? I can't believe that I will see him. I want to hug him, but sadly there's no way for me to hug him and greet him. There's no way for my hand to touch him. I can't hold his hand. I can't touch him, and he can't touch me.
At dawn, the prisoners' relatives who were allowed to visit were waiting at the International Red Cross headquarters in Gaza.
I am very, very happy that I can see my son, very happy. But my happiness is not complete because my children are not with me.
Under the pretext that the visit is a pilot, it was subjected to Israel's strict conditions. Regardless, the Red Cross and the prisoners' relatives hope the visits will continue and include all Palestinian prisoners.
We hope that it includes all prisoners in the Israeli prisons and that visits are permitted to all families.
Today's visit is an incomplete step, but it is headed in the right direction. A step that shows that the prisoners and their families have a long path to attaining their legitimate rights, most notably the right to freedom. Wael al-Dadua, Al Jazeera, Beit Hanun, Northern Gaza.
In diplomatic news, after nearly 2 years since her last visit to Israel, U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton is in the country for a series of high-level talks with Israeli leaders. More in this report from IBA's Eli Wogelenter.
Secretary of State Hillary Rodham Clinton met with President Shimon Peres at the president's residence this morning for talks on a range of issues, including Iran's nuclear program, Egypt, Syria, and peace negotiations with the Palestinians. Clinton stressed the need for cooperation in tumultuous times.
It is a time of uncertainty, but also of opportunity. It is a chance to advance our shared goals of security, stability, peace, and democracy, along with prosperity for the millions of people in this region who have yet to see a better future. And it is in moments like these that friends like us have to think together, act together. We are called to be smart, creative, and courageous.
In his remarks, Peres also touched on the areas of discussion, describing the civil war ravaging Syria as a primarily humanitarian, not political problem. It has gone beyond what can be accepted by humanity, regardless of whether you are a Christian, Jew, or Arab, he said. Peres also spoke of the importance of maintaining Israel's three-decade peace with Egypt and voiced support for the Obama administration's pressure on Iran to halt its nuclear activities.
We appreciate very much your position. We trust its depth and dedication and determination, and we feel partners to it. And I hope that it won't take a long time before Iran will return to her culture and to her tradition and be a free nation among free nations, that nobody threatens her and she shouldn't threaten anybody else.
The president reportedly also discussed with Clinton the matter of releasing spy Jonathan Pollard while protesters gathered outside to keep the issue alive. Earlier in the day, Clinton was greeted at the Foreign Ministry by Minister Avigdor Lieberman. Clinton briefed Lieberman on her visit to Egypt, where she met for the first time with that country's newly elected Islamist president, Mohamed Morsi. At her last stop in Egypt at the port city of Alexandria, several hundred protesters shouted "Monica, Monica," and pelted Clinton's departing motorcade with shoes and tomatoes. Clinton is scheduled to meet later today with Palestinian Prime Minister Salam Fayyad, Defense Minister Ehud Barak, and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu before holding a news conference later tonight. Eli Wogelanter, IBA News.
Syria's local coordination committee said 44 civilians were killed today by Syrian security forces in different cities. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights clarified that clashes are taking place in some regions and neighborhoods in Damascus, especially in al-Maidan, where armored vehicles were deployed for the first time. On the other hand, the official Syrian news agency Sana said government forces caused losses within the ranks of a terrorist group in az-Zour.
Syrian television said it was providing this live coverage from the neighborhood of al-Midan in Damascus. The neighborhood looks deserted amid the presence of security forces. The government's television and the regime's supporters accuse the media of fabricating the news. They say the shelling of the neighborhoods of the city of Damascus that was reported by sources of the opposition's activists never happened. According to Syria's official news agency, Sana, a group of gunmen fled the neighborhood of El-Tadamon on Sunday, and security forces chased them. Of course, the official story has generally stayed the same over the long months of the uprising. The official media's accusation that malicious satellite TV channels are partly responsible for the Syrian bloodshed is a chorus repeated by the regime's supporters. In this framework, Syrian media spoke of the coverage of the unconfirmed defection of General Rustam Ghazali, a leader of the Syrian military intelligence. Syrian channel Al-Dunya reported that Ghazali was quick to confirm his loyalty to the political leadership and denied that some of his family members sought refuge in Jordan. Activists had posted clips online saying they depict al-Ghazali's brother-in-law. The Syrian Foreign Ministry spokesman's version of the story on the events in Al-Tremsa in Hama's countryside, and specifically in relation to the use of heavy weapons, was contradicted by the International Observer's delegation.
In this attack, there was use of heavy weapons on populations.
In this attack, there was use of heavy weapons on residential areas. The observers confirmed that weapons were used directly and indirectly, including artillery and mortars. The opposition accused government forces of using heavy weapons to target neighborhoods in the city of Hama on Monday. They posted images online to confirm their claim. Clashes were reportedly ongoing between the opposition's fighters and the government forces in some parts of the capital amid an intensive security deployment in many parts of the countryside of Damascus. The bombardment and clashes also reached the cities and towns of Homs, Idlib, Dir ez-Zour, and Daraa provinces.
A group of honorable members and soldiers manning a checkpoint in the city of Sheikh Meskin defected last night.
The crisis in Syria is a civil war and a, quote, non-international armed conflict, according to the International Committee of the Red Cross, that made the same statement during the third month of the Libyan uprising. The scale and expansion of the clashes discussed by the committee will not be prevented with the continued protests in some parts of the country. Many participants have announced their support for the armed option to confront what they consider the violence of the authorities. Wa'el al-Hajjar, BBC.
Our top story, the dispute over how to end Syria's unrest is getting more bitter, with Russia saying it's being blackmailed by the West to accept intervention in Syria.
The Geneva talks did not cease.
Our Western colleagues introduced an alternative draft in which Geneva decisions are not fully reflected. Their draft includes requirements to introduce sanctions against the Syrian government in line with Chapter 7 of the UN Charter. But the Geneva talks did not see such a decision, and the participants in the Geneva talks did not commit to such a decision. Unfortunately, there are some blackmailing elements. They say that if you don't agree to our drafts in line with Chapter 7 of the UN Charter, we will not extend the mandate of the mission. I believe this is counterproductive and quite a dangerous approach.
As a token is,
Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov opposes sanctions or military action against Syria. He insists that international players should instead try and convince both sides in the conflict to lay down their arms and engage in dialogue. The US and its allies have drafted a Security Council resolution that threatens sanctions against Damascus, but they need the consent of two veto-wielding members, Russia and China. Right now, UN Arab League envoy Kofi Annan is heading to Moscow, and UN chief Ban Ki-moon will be visiting Beijing to try and bring the two key players on board. The UAE shows its true colors when it comes to dealing with activists. The coalition of Arab Emirates has just sent a prominent human rights activist to exile. Ahmed Abdul Khaliq, to be sent to Thailand, was arrested back in May of this year as part of a government crackdown that began in 2011. He is among 5 people arrested for calling for reform. The small Persian Gulf nation stripped him of his citizenship and swapped it for another, one from the Comoros Island just off the southeast coast of Africa. A 2009 report showed that the Arab Emirates had struck a $200 million deal with the government of Comoros to provide passports for people it makes stateless. Now, Bahrainis are angry at the killing of a third activist in less than 10 days in neighboring Saudi Arabia. They've taken to the streets to hold a mock funeral procession. The demonstrators shouted anti-Saudi government slogans and condemned the killing of the activist. Saudi forces have killed several demonstrators over the past few days as they're continuing a crackdown on all protests. The latest pictures that you're looking at right now are coming from Bahrain. Demonstrators there have been coming out calling for the downfall of the regime since last year. Since February 2011, scores of people have been killed and thousands more detained.
Thousands of Pakistanis in several cities protested the reopening of NATO supply routes in Afghanistan. They warned the government of marching towards Islamabad if its policy doesn't change.
NATO supply routes start from here, the coastal city of Karachi in the south, and extend to the Pakistani-Afghan border in the north. And also from here, cries of indignation are unleashed at the government's violation of the people's sovereignty over their land with the reopening of supply routes to the American and Western forces occupying Afghanistan. The protesters say there is an obligation to cut ties with NATO forces and end the cooperation between Islamabad and Washington. According to a majority of the Pakistani street, this would have a stronger and more powerful impact than receiving a casual and late apology from the American Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. The apology was necessary to reduce the pressure on the foreign forces that have received painful blows recently.
People are protesting and agitating.
The people are protesting and expressing their opinion that supplies to NATO must stop, and drone attacks must also stop.
The reason for the Pakistani streets mobilization with such great momentum, as witnessed in other cities as well, is related to the government's decision to hide at times and reveal at others its foreign policy changes and violations of state sovereignty in order to achieve strategic American goals in the region.
Pakistan should revisit its...
Pakistan must review its foreign policies. Our foreign policies must be independent.
The protests that covered the streets of Karachi is another chapter in a series of protests in Pakistan and are similar to those held in the city of Peshawar 2 days ago near the Afghan border. The Defense Council of Pakistan coalition, that consists of 40 political parties and religious groups, has threatened to escalate these demonstrations.
4 gunmen were killed when an explosive vest exploded during an attack on an intelligence center in the city of Banu in northeastern Pakistan. The attack occurred in a tribal area near the Afghan border and lasted 3 hours. Security forces cordoned off the scene and exchanged gunfire with the attackers. The forces managed to arrest the 5th attacker. Local security sources confirmed that an officer was killed in the clashes and that the assailants held a number of security forces hostage. The Pakistani Taliban claimed responsibility for the attack.
Despite the optimistic and encouraging remarks expressed by al-Khartoum's ruling party over the handshake and meeting between the 2 Sudan's presidents on the sidelines of the African Union summit, talks between the 2 sides remain deadlocked, and that may lower the ceiling of expectations. Analysts believe the meeting will have little effect on the outcome of the AU summit, slated to discuss issues besides the Sudanese crisis. Both Sudanese rivals need to lower their ceiling of demands, especially in regard to issues related to the border, security, and oil. They must accept the African mediators before the UN Security Council's deadline expires next August. Sami al-Shinawi reports from al-Khartoum.
A handshake and a meeting between al-Bashir and Salva Kiir took place in the Ethiopian capital Addis Ababa. For its part, the ruling party in al-Khartoum described the event as a positive gesture, which will help move the negotiation process forward. This new rapprochement effort comes after the stalemate between the 2 sides reached an explosive level. Al-Khartoum's government hopes the positive atmosphere will be reflected on the negotiation process.
I believe this round of talks has taken all issues into consideration. All parties have agreed to adopt a strategic approach, which indicates that a positive atmosphere is dominating the current round of negotiations.
The issue between al-Khartoum and Juba will be a hot topic on the agenda of the African Union leaders' meeting in Addis Ababa. Observers believe the issues will be difficult to maneuver, especially considering the rigid positions adopted by the 2 sides, adding that they did not find anything in the meeting between Bashir and Salva Kiir that calls for optimism. They added that Juba's hesitation implies its intention to try to transfer the issues to an international arena.
Juba believes that the international community, particularly the U.S., will stand behind it. So it's in its best interest to have the case transferred from the African Union to the UN Security Council.
The African mediation has failed so far to resolve the crisis between Juba and al-Khartoum, as the stalled issues have continued to linger since the start of negotiations and as the situation has been deteriorating in both countries. The handshake between al-Bashir and Salva Kiir is an indication of a breakthrough in the crisis, as confirmed by the ruling party. However, others believe it's a mere courtesy in an old friendship, ruling out that such a meeting will be able to cool the tense atmosphere surrounding the negotiations, especially amid Juba's desire to search for a solution outside the African court. Sami al-Shinawi, Dubai TV, al-Khartoum.
Deputy Interior Minister Ahmed al-Kafaji denied terrorist groups infiltrated Iraq through its borders with neighboring countries.
In a statement to Al-Markaz Al-Khabari, an Iraqi media network, Al-Kafaji clarified that ministry forces are conducting continuous patrols on the border, assuring that border patrol forces were able to control the area and prevent all border violations. He added that infiltrations by terrorist groups have significantly decreased over the past 2 years. The significant decrease in terrorist operations in Nainawa province is the result of security services' repeated successes, credited to the continuous cooperation of civilians and the activation of intelligence efforts.
Over the last few days, the Army's 2nd Division confiscated a large number of weapons and explosives, arresting many members of terrorist groups.
A security operation by the Iraqi Army's 2nd Division in Mosul led to the confiscation of a large amount of weapons and explosives and the arrest of a group of terrorists. Major General Ali al-Faraji, the commander of the division, confirmed that these successful operations were the result of the citizens' cooperation and the efforts of the intelligence agency. Al-Faraji also assured that terrorist operations have decreased in comparison to the last period, which indicates that security forces are in charge and have a tight grip on all areas. Arresting such dangerous terrorist groups is a good and positive indication that the 2nd Division of the Iraqi Army is in control of the city over the sources of terrorism and is also controlling the security situation in the city. From inside the headquarters of the Iraqi Army 2nd Division, Khalid al-Duri, Al-Arakia. The views expressed on Mosaic are from contributing broadcasters, not Link TV or its sponsors. The production of Mosaic is made possible by grants from the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, the Wincoat Foundation, the Firedoll Foundation, and by support of viewers like you. Thank you. Watch Mosaic World News online. Stay up to date with breaking news, read our blog, get transcripts of past shows, and more at linktv.org/mosaic. Airwaves, a global channel of uncompromising stories, world news, documentaries, entertainment, and culture. Link TV, connecting you to the world. For more information, visit linktv.org.